Another day, another story. Old French fairy tales. The harvest. Henry walked a long time, but he walked in vain, for he saw that he was no farther from the foot of the mountain and no nearer to the summit than he had been when he crossed the river. Any other child would have retraced his steps, but the brave little Henry would not allow himself to be discouraged. Notwithstanding his extreme fatigue, he walked on 21 days without seeming to make any advance. At the end of this time he was no more discouraged than at the close of the first day. "If I am obliged to walk 100 years, he said aloud, "I will go on till I reach the summit." "You have then a great desire to arrive there, little boy?" said an old man, looking at him maliciously and standing just in his path. "What are you seeking at the top of this mountain?" "The plan of life, my good sir, to save the life of my dear mother who is about to die." The little old man shook his head, rested his little pointed chin on the top of his gold-headed cane, and after having a long time regarded Henry, he said, "Your sweet and fresh face pleases me, my boy. I am one of the genii of this mountain. I will allow you to advance on condition that you will gather all my wheat, that you will beat it out, make it into flour and then into bread. When you have gathered, beaten, ground and cooked it, then call me. You will find all the necessary implements in the ditch near you. The fields of wheat are before you and cover the mountain." The old man disappeared, and Henry gazed in terror at the immense fields of wheat which were spread out before him. But he soon mastered this feeling of discouragement, took off his vest, seized a scythe and commenced cutting the wheat diligently. This occupied him 195 days and nights. When the wheat was all cut, Henry commenced to beat it with a flail which he found at hand. This occupied him 60 days. When the grain was all beaten out, he began to grind it in a mill which rose up suddenly near him. This occupied him 70 days. When the wheat was all ground, he began to knead it and to cook it. He kneaded and cooked for 120 days. As the bread was cooked, he arranged it properly on shelves, like books in a library. When all was finished, Henry was transported with joy and called the genius of the mountain, who appeared immediately and counted 468,329 new loaves of bread. He bit and ate a little and off of 2 or 3, drew near to Henry, tapped him on the cheek and said, "You are a good boy and I wish to pay you for your work." He drew from his pocket a little wooden box which he gave to Henry and said, maliciously, "When you return home, open this box and you will find in it the most delicious tobacco you have ever seen." Now Henry had never used tobacco, and the present of the little genius seemed to him very useless, but he was too polite to let this be seen, and he thanked the old man as if satisfied. The old one smiled, then burst out laughing and disappeared. The vintage. Henry began to walk rapidly and perceived with great delight that every step brought him nearer to the summit of the mountain. In 3 hours he had walked 2/3 of the way. But suddenly he found himself arrested by a very high wall which he had not perceived before. He walked around it, and found, after 3 days' diligent advance, that this wall surrounded the entire mountain, and that there was no door, not the smallest opening by which he could enter. Henry seated himself on the ground, to reflect upon his situation. He resolved to wait patiently. He sat there 45 days. At the end of this time he said, "I will not go back if I have to wait here 100 years. He had scarcely uttered these words when a part of the wall crumbled away with a terrible noise, and he saw in the opening a giant, brandishing an enormous cudgel. "You have then a great desire to pass here, my boy? What are you seeking beyond my wall?" "I am seeking the plan of life, Master Giant, to cure my poor mother who is dying. If it is in your power and you will allow me to pass this wall, I will do anything for you that you may command." "Is it so? Well, listen. Your countenance pleases me. I am one of the genii of this mountain. I will allow you to pass this wall if you will fill my wine cellar. Here are all my vines. Gather the grapes, crush them, put the juice in the casks and arrange them well in my wine cellar. You will find all the implements necessary at the foot of this wall. When it is done, call me." The giant disappeared, closing the wall behind him. Henry looked around him, and as far as he could see, the vines of the giant were growing luxuriously. "Well, well, said Henry to himself, "I cut all the wheat of the little old man, I can surely also gather the grapes of the big giant. It will not take me so long, and it will not be as difficult to make wine of these grapes as to make bread of the wheat." Henry took off his coat, picked up a pruning knife which he saw at his feet, and began to cut the grapes and throw them into the vats. It took him 30 days to gather. A part of the wall crumbled with a terrible noise, this crop. When all was finished, he crushed the grapes, poured the juice into the casks and ranged them in the cellar, which they completely filled. He was 90 days making the wine. When the wine was ready and everything in the cellar in complete order, Henry called the giant, who immediately appeared, examined the casks, tasted the wine, then turned towards Henry and said, "You are a brave little man, and I wish to pay you for your trouble. It shall not be said that you worked gratis for the giant of the mountain." He drew a thistle from his pocket, gave it to Henry and said, "After your return home, whenever you desire anything, smell this thistle." Henry did not think the giant very generous, but he received the thistle with an amiable smile. Then the giant whistled so loudly that the mountain trembled and the wall and giant disappeared entirely, and Henry was unable to continue his journey. The chase. Henry was within a half-hour's walk of the summit of the mountain when he reached a pit so wide that he could not possibly jump to the other side, and so deep that it seemed bottomless. Henry did not lose courage, however. He followed the borders of the pit till he found himself where he started from, and knew that this yawning pit surrounded the mountain. "Alas! What shall I do?" said poor Henry. "I scarcely overcome one obstacle when another more difficult seems to rise up before me. How shall I ever pass this pit?" The poor child felt for the first time that his eyes were filled with tears. He looked around for some means of passing over, but saw no possible chance, and seated himself sadly on the brink of the precipice. Suddenly he heard a terrible growl. He turned and saw within 10 steps of him an enormous wolf gazing at him with flaming eyes. "What are you seeking in my kingdom?" said the wolf, in a threatening voice. "Master Wolf, I am seeking the plan of life which alone can save my dear mother, who is about to die. If you will assist me to cross this pit, I will be your devoted servant and will obey any command you may give me." "Well, my boy, if you will catch all the game which is in my forests, birds and beasts, and make them up into pies and nice roasts, by the faith of the genius of the mountain, I will pass you over to the other side. You will find near this tree all the instruments necessary to catch the game and to cook it. When your work is done, call me." Saying these words, he disappeared. Henry took courage. He lifted a bow and arrow which he saw on the ground, and began to shoot at the partridges, woodcocks, pheasants and game of all kinds which abounded there. But, alas! He did not understand it and killed nothing. During 8 days he was shooting right and left in vain, and was at last weaned and despairing, when he saw near him the crow whose life he had saved in the commencement of his journey. "You rescued me from mortal danger," said the crow, "and I told you I should see you again. I have come to redeem my promise. If you do not fulfill your promise to the wolf, he will change you into some terrible wild beast. Follow me, I am going a-hunting, and you have only to gather the game and cook it." Saying these words, the crow flew above the trees of the forest, and with his beak and his claws killed all the game to be found. In fact, during 150 days he caught 1,860,726 animals and birds, squirrels, moorcocks, pheasants, and quails. As the crow killed them, Henry plucked the feathers, skinned them, cut them up and cooked them in roasts or pies. When all was cooked he arranged them neatly, and then the crow said to him, "Adieu, Henry. There remains one obstacle yet to overcome, but in that difficulty I cannot aid you. But do not be discouraged. The good fairies protect filial love." Before Henry had time to thank the crow, he had disappeared. He then called the wolf and said to him, "Master Wolf, here is all the game of your forest. I have prepared it as you ordered, and now will you assist me to pass this precipice?" The wolf examined a pheasant, crunched a roast squirrel and a pie, licked his lips and said to Henry, "You are a brave and good boy. I will pay you for your trouble. It shall not be said that you have worked for the wolf of the mountain without receiving your reward." Saying these words, he gave Henry a staff which he cut in the forest, and said to him, "When you have gathered the plant of life and wish yourself transported to any part of the world, mount the stick and it will be your horse." Henry was on the point of throwing this useless stick into the woods, but he wished to be polite, and receiving it smilingly, he thanked the wolf cordially. "Get on my back," Henry slashed at the wolf. Henry sprang upon the wolf's back and he made it 87 bounds so prodigious that they landed immediately on the other side of the precipice. Henry dismounted, thanked the wolf and walked on vigorously. The end.